Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. My name is Aurelio Muraca. I'm the Technology Program Coordinator here at the Danbury Library. And we welcome you to another installment of Earth in Crisis, Series 2. And this talk is going to be about the Sixth Extinction. So sit back and relax. And without further ado, Dr. Mitch.
Thank you. You want to let me?
I will certainly. Hold on a second. I will make you a co-host. There you go, sir. Sorry about that.
There we go. All righty. As usual, I have to. Can you confirm that you see the science building?
Yes, I do.
And you guys can hear me, I guess. And so off we go. As I always do, I start with a picture of where I spend my my days during the week, and this is the science building at Western Connecticut State University. It houses the biology department, the chemistry department, and the physics, astronomy, meteorology department. And it's on the West Side campus. And if any of you would like a tour of it, contact me, and I'd be delighted to show you around. It's a nice building. We've been in it since 2005, but it's really very nice place to play our trade, full of students, which is what I like about it. Okay, some of you may remember 1968 like I do. Some of you maybe don't. 1968 was around Christmas time, particularly. I was 9 years old and I was visiting my grandparents' home in the Ozarks, where I grew up. And we were watching the moon landing, or not the moon landing, but the moon orbiting of Apollo 8 mission. And one of the things that these folks were doing, in addition to getting ready for Apollo 11, which would follow in less than a year, was taking pictures back at Earth. For the first time ever in our entire existence, we were able to look back at our home with with a view that is only one frame. Okay. And it was Anders, I think, Bill Anders, who did the photography, and luckily someone slipped in a color camera as well, and we got some fantastic photographs that became college dorm room posters back in my day. There were lots of people who would buy the poster and put it on their wall, or it became flags and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, it was a change of perspective, and so that we are not just ants looking at 1 square inch of Earth's surface and assuming that every other place is like ours, but we see the Earth as a great diverse globe with active weather and active oceans and active life in it. I find it very comforting to see these pictures and the ones that came afterwards. Let's see here, advance. Well, Earth didn't start this way. Way back in the way back, at the beginning of the solar system, when the sun began to light and it accumulated enough mass that it started attracting other mass, there were chunks of mass that were larger than the others, and that basically reached a size where whatever shape they were before, they became a ball. Okay. One of the interesting things about gravity is that if you had a teacup the size of the planet Jupiter, it would crush itself down to a sphere very quickly. Okay, because that much mass wants to be a sphere. And our Earth, like all the other objects in our solar system at that particular time, was a hot mess. It was hot rocks. If you were to drill down from your backyard and go towards the center of the Earth, the temperature would get hotter and hotter and hotter, and that heat at the center of the Earth is leftover residual heat from this point, from the early Earth. Well, And so the Earth, the solar system looked like this. Honest to God, this really does relate to mass extinctions. But the objects that orbited the sun began to come together. They attracted to each other and form larger and larger chunks and so on. And our planets formed that way. Okay, and two of those planets are particularly large. They're farther from the sun than ours is, and that's Saturn and Mars, or Saturn and Jupiter. And they are having large gravity wells out there to sweep up all the little rocks, is one of the reasons why life is possible here on Earth. There are a number of things that makes Earth the sweet spot for life in the solar system, and that's one of them. Now, another thing happened in the early Earth, and that is a planet, an object that it was the size as Mars is, slammed into the early Earth. And what happened is that object, which is called Theia by the astronomers, the people who study such things, was consumed into the Earth, and the force of the collision caused chunks of Earth to pop out, 2 of them to be exact, which then came together to form what we know as the moon. And that's the reason we have such a large moon relative to the size of the Earth, which is another reason why Earth is a lovely place for life, is because we got a big old gravity object out there that it's fairly close to the Earth that affects us, causes tides to come in and go out, and encourages the movement of the plates relative to each other and all that stuff. Those things are important for supporting life. All right. Now, let me give you some milestones. I may have shown this series of milestones earlier talk. I've done so many of them now that I have forgot what I've said to whom. But the Earth was formed about 4.7 billion years ago. And of course, we don't have that number down to 8 decimal points. That's just our best guess. And that by 4,280 billion years ago, conditions on Earth had cooled and modified to the point where life was possible at that point. Bacterial life. Now, do we know that it was here then? No, we don't know that. We just know the conditions would have potentially supported life as we understand it. The reason we don't know is the farther back in time we get, the fewer fossils there are and the fewer traces of life we can find. Not because they didn't exist, but because of all the things that have happened over time, erosion and melting rocks and all this stuff. All right. So maybe we had bacteria about then. Where they came from is not part of this discussion. Now, animals popped up quite a bit later. The first humans much later after that, just 2 million. And those humans were not as we know ourselves now, but a earlier ancestor. And anatomically, modern humans didn't show up until 250,000 years ago, and they appeared in East Africa. Now, that is part of the story we're going to talk about. And the end of the most recent ice age was about 16,000 years ago. Agriculture, invented by humans and practiced, started around 10,000 years ago. The Industrial Revolution was 220 years ago, and the Beatles broke up in 1970. So there you go. There we have the milestones of human history right there, or Earth's history. I frame it that way so that you'll understand the next thing I'm going to show you, which is the geological timeline. Now, geologists, the people who study the Earth and its history and its formation and its current Activity, by the way, Mauna Loa in the Big Island, Hawaii, Shield volcano is erupting as we speak. It does that every so often. Okay. Well, anyway, the history of Earth, in order to be studied, has to be named. It has to be defined and named, and scientists come up with names for it that mean something to them. They are, for the uninitiated, for those that are not scientists, they tend to be words that you'll never remember in a million years. The Ordovician and the Silurian. Okay. Silurian shows up in a Doctor Who episode later on, but that's something else. All right, anyway, so about 542 million years ago, when this time scheme was invented by geologists, that was about the time where that were the oldest rocks that at the time we saw fossils of animals. And animals are a bias in this scheme because, of course, the geologists were animals. So therefore, they are the most important after all, right? So anyway, so 542 million years, it turns out there were animals or something like animals before that. There are some whatsits and who's its that we have no idea what the hell they are, but they may be animals that show up and we didn't find out until later. Okay. So anyway, we divided up, the scientists of the world divided up the history of the world into geological eras, the Cambrian, the Ordovician, the Silurian, Devonian, and on and on and on, based on fossils. And the boundaries between one period and another period were a change in fossils, where one set of animals disappeared and were replaced by another set of animals. Not completely, but significantly. Okay, something that is in the rock that is marked. Fossils. All right. What that means is if you got a bunch of fossils that are disappearing to be replaced by others, that there must have been an extinction event that occurred between each one. An extinction event could be relatively severe or not so severe. We don't often know everything we want to know at this point. Okay. And the eras of the world were divided up based on these animals as well. So we have the Paleozoic, the old animals. We have the Mesozoic, the middle animals, which the 7-year-old in me wants to call the age of dinosaurs. Okay, the Cenozoic, which means the recent animals, animals that were around after the dinosaurs disappeared. Okay, but the separations are all extinction events. Now, the topic of tonight is the sixth of those large extinctions, because there are modest extinctions that separate geological eras, but there are some big ones, some ones that were specifically significant in that large numbers of animals completely disappeared. It was that severe, and not just a matter of the number of different kinds of trilobites were reduced by 25%. That's significant, but nothing like what were all the trilobites disappearing, like happened in the end of the Permian. All right. And so the largest of these extinctions, I'll show you, there's their location and time in a minute, happened in the past, and the sixth of them is happening right now. And it's not something that just happened since 1968 or some other arbitrary date. It's something that's been happening since the end of the last ice age. Some of the extinctions were due to the natural cycles. Some of them, a large portion of it, is due to human activity, okay, which is where we come in. All right, so this thing is also called the Holocene extinction or the Anthropocene extinction. If we go back here, you'll see the last geological epoch on the top right is the Holocene. Okay, that is the time since the end of the last ice age. Okay, so that is the time frame for the last 10,000 years or so for the extinction that's currently going on. All right. Anthropocene is the proposed name for the next geological epoch, which is one that is directly affected root and branch by human activity. All right. So where we see the big diversity or the big change in organisms lost are in the disappearances of large land animals that start at the end of the last glacial period. More on that in a minute. These are called megafauna. Okay, the megafauna in Africa are still there in some degree, because the megafauna of Africa evolved in at the time when human cultures were evolving, and so they developed ways to stay out of our way in a way that woolly mammoths and woolly rhinoceroses and stuff did not. Okay, so the Eurasian megafauna was largely unaffected, and the African megafauna were largely unaffected until just a few hundred years ago, when humans developed efficient ways of killing them, guns and stuff. Okay, outside of Eurasia and Africa, then the megafauna were just decimated by human activities. We're talking about Australia and the larger islands and the smaller islands and North and South America. And as of late, for the last couple hundred years, climate change has also been a big factor, because climate change changes the context in which all this is happening. All right, now here's some data showing exactly what we have in mind with this. Each one of the four graphs on the top are, hang on, we're not ready for that one yet. Each one of the four graphs on the top show the percent survival of large mammal species. The little triangle in each one indicates the time at which humans appeared in that continent or large island. Okay, so you can see in Africa, where humans evolved, all these animals and humans grew up together. They knew how to deal with each other and not to be to avoid destruction in a way that North American mammals did not. Okay, Australia, which was the first of the continents outside of Eurasia and Africa to be colonized by humans, you can see humans rise at where the triangle is, and then the big animals disappeared pretty quick. Okay, some of them occurred when the Aboriginals show up. Some of them waited to die out when Europeans showed up, okay, with efficient ways of killing things. North America is the same. The North Americans show up, and we're talking about Native Americans at this point. We're not talking about Europeans yet, although we Europeans certainly had our part to play. But the North America, the Paleo Indians crossed over the land bridge into North America and did so, and had technologies and skills that the North American megafauna were just, and South American too later on, were just not prepared to avoid. And then Madagascar, big island off the coast of Southeast Africa, was colonized later, even though it's actually fairly close to Africa, and same thing happened. So every time humans arrived in some large landmass, the large animals, the mammals and the birds, and the giant birds in the case of the Madagascar, disappeared in a relatively short amount of time thereafter. Speaking of large birds, whenever you have a an island where birds have colonized, there will be some of those birds that will lose the ability to fly. Okay, like the ostrich did in Africa, even though it's not an island. And because they develop other skills that allow them to avoid predators and so on. Okay, so not counting the ostrich who are still around. These other three standing birds there are ones that are that disappeared relatively recently. The one on the far left is the elephant bird in Madagascar that died shortly after the colonization of that, or the arrival of humans. And in New Zealand, you had the moa, which was a large flightless bird that didn't survive very long after the Maori show up. The dodos in Mauritius which is a story all to itself, in Mauritius and the Indian Ocean, and the great auk that died not too long ago, 100 years or so. I don't remember exactly the same date, but they were in the North Atlantic. Now, human impacts, where we have appeared, develop. Sometimes they develop relatively slowly. Sometimes they have a rapid impact. The higher the technological level that when humans appear in a particular landmass, the higher their effects are going to be, and the faster the extinctions will go. Human population is one. Turns out we breed like rabbits, so to speak. We also have a large per capita consumption rate of food and other resources. Okay. Now, this varies from culture to culture, even to this day, the per capita consumption rate, but it's still higher per kilogram than most wild animals. Our production of meat in terms of cows and pigs and lamb and sheep and goats and so on. Okay, our tendency to deforest, cut down forest in order to burn the wood to heat our homes, and B, use the wood for all sorts of useful things, and C, to open up pastures for grazing cattle and so on. Okay, we tend to overfish because we are pulling fish out of an invisible space to us that we have no running calculation of how many fish remain. And so we tend to overdo it. We can see ourselves reducing the number of buffalo in a buffalo herd. We cannot see the number of tuna remaining without special technology and special statistical, sampling and stuff. Okay. Ocean acidification is something that followed along along with the burning of fossil fuels. The amount of CO2 in the atmosphere increases the amount of hydrogen ions in water, just like it does in our bloodstream, producing CO2 in our cells, and so on. And so it has increased the acidity and made it very difficult for those organisms in the ocean who need calcium to obtain it, and the destruction of wetlands and the decline in amphibian populations. Okay, now climate change, as I've talked about before, is a whole bunch of things all at the same time, and including some things that are well known to most of us, CO2 going up, and a bunch of stuff that we probably never heard of, like ocean acidity perhaps, and the likelihood of extreme weather and all that sort of stuff. These are all effects that are manifestly studied, and this is honest to God data. Right. Other things that happen that is a byproduct of climate change is chaotic behavior, strange, weird things that we did not expect to happen in a million years. Like, for instance, a heat dome in Antarctica back in March. Who would have thought there would be a heat dome? The kind of heat domes you have in Texas sometimes. But milder, happening in Antarctica, the coldest place on Earth. But it did, and there was rain on the South Pole for the first time that anybody knows. So there are weird, crazy things that are all thrown in just to keep us on our toes, I guess. Well, remember that that all life on Earth is all member of the same family. We are not a classification family, but we are all related in that we all share this crazy stuff called DNA. Okay, and we can trace the relationship of the mightiest king or president on planet Earth to the lowest bacteria, if you want to actually, if you want to do the lab work to find out. We're all related. Humans are organisms within ecosystems. All right, let's see here. Now, another thing to remember is that way back, all the continents were not in the locations they are today. What we see as continents, land masses above sea level, are all chunks of the Earth's crust that have cooled enough to actually form solids. And as new crusts are formed, the old crusts are pushed in new directions, and over time, the continents and the bits of things are all in different locations. Notable, India was only recently added to Asia. Recently, in geological times, it slammed into the southern edge of Asia and formed the Himalayan mountains, which is one of the reasons why they're so tall, because they haven't eroded all that much yet. All right. The other thing to remember is it wasn't until relatively recently in the cosmic scheme of things, in the last 2 billion years, when there was oxygen in the atmosphere. So from the point when life first appeared to 2 billion years or so ago, the only animals, the only organisms that could live are those that did not require oxygen, which meant bacteria. With the invention of photosynthesis by cyanobacteria and the release of oxygen into the atmosphere, big critters could evolve at that point. All right, so we're going to take a different look at these geological timelines, and we're going to lay them on their side. So the letters on the top are the shorthand for those. We have the Cambrian, the Ordovician, the Silurian, the Devonian, and on and on and on. All right. Each one of these blue spikes, blue columns, indicates a reduction in the amount of organisms, an extinction event. So we can see that extinction events were not constant, but they certainly weren't uncommon in Earth's history. We can also see by the end, the one to the right of K, the Cretaceous, is the big rock that fell in Mexico that killed the dinosaurs, with the exception of the birds. Okay, the tallest one of these peaks is what's called the Permian Triassic extinction event. And it was caused by massive volcanic activity that went on and on and on up in what is now Siberia. It's called the Siberian Traps. And that was the largest of the mass extinctions because it killed the highest fraction of organisms, including totally wiping out certain things that had been abundant in time past before, like trilobites and sea scorpions and cool invertebrates like that, which some of you may not have seen before. Okay, so it forms the boundary between the Permian and the Triassic. That's hence the name, PTR. All right, now the 5 most profound ones were the Ordovician Silurian boundary, a big extinction event in the late Devonian, Permian, the Triassic Jurassic extinction event, and then the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which is the end of the dinosaurs as most of us recognize them. Okay, so these are the big five extinction events. Now, recently, two others have been added. One of them, which is the Capitonian, I think. I'm not familiar with the details of it because I just recently learned about it, which happened earlier in the Permian. And then the Holocene extinction event, which is the one we're talking about today primarily, that happened just in the last 10 to 16,000 years. Okay, so they are not counted among the five, although the Holocene is now considered the sixth. Now, going back to this KPG extinction event, the Cretaceous Paleogene event, it was caused by a big rock. It was the fifth extinction, the one previous to this one. It was a big asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. 2 million, it released energy 2 million times more forceful than the largest nuclear bomb ever detonated by humans. More forceful than the largest supervolcano, the particularly large volcanic eruptions that sometimes occur. And it caused a mega tsunami, big tidal wave over 1,000 feet high, and clouds of superheated ash that started forest fires around the world. That is what laid waste to diversity. And it basically eliminated the big dinosaurs with the exception of birds. Now, another thing that you may or may not have heard, that scientists for some time now have considered birds to be a branch of the dinosaurs. And in fact, a lot of the dinosaurs, especially in the Cretaceous, that are depicted in movies, I'm thinking about the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, in reality had feathers. They looked like big ferocious chickens, not these scaly, fast T-Rex like things. They were still predators, but they were a different kind, a different look to them. And so the birds that we have left are the leftovers, the dinosaurs that didn't get killed by the rock. It hit right here, and it formed, if you look at the satellite images, you can see a bunch of wells called cenotes, which are a source of water for much of the post-classic Maya civilization. Now, another thing to look at over Earth's history, in this case, it's from 542. It's all a million years ago. It's from the beginning of the Cambrian, when we have lots of animal diversity. Is that ever so often an ice age comes along, and there have been 4 of these major ice ages. Now, it's more complicated than that. There are warm times within the ice ages. There are cold times within the interglacials. But generally speaking, there are 4 big ones since 542. There were some super colossal ones that happened before, but they're not part of this story. And if we look even closer, this is the last 500,000 years or so, we see that we can actually find out when the ice sheets, or when the greenhouse, when the glaciers appeared, how long they lasted, and how intensive they were. Okay, using information that we get from ice from Antarctica. Because back in the last ice age, the ice covered large areas of the northern hemisphere. Not so much the southern hemisphere, because there isn't as much land mass in the southern hemisphere. The thing to note here is how having all that ice up on land affects the shape of the continents. So during the height of the last ice age, you see that that Great Britain was part of Europe, the mainland. You see that much of what is now Indonesia and Malaysia was part of Asia, and you see that New Guinea was part of Australia. Okay, and most importantly, you see the land bridge between Asia and North America was connected because sea level was low. And so 2,000 years ago, you can see the land bridge here on the left, separating, connecting Alaska and Siberia. About 15,000 years ago, the continent separated, and as it is today. Okay, the more water there is, the less ice there is up on land, the more water there is in the ocean. Now, the megafauna which we lost after the ice age that died either because climate had changed or because humans had hunted them included woolly mammoths, one of my personal favorites, woolly rhinoceroses, American lions, Pleistocene horses, which might still be around. There's a wild horse called the Kowalski's horse, which may be a close relative. We're not sure. Steppe bison, which were, the progenitors of American bison, and giant short-faced bears and all sorts of other things. Now, those organisms died soon after the ice left because they came in contact with larger numbers of humans that hunted them and needed their skins for tents and for clothing and whatnot, and sometimes protect ourselves, right? Now, the extinctions are happening at a different scale. They're not happening in the great big stuff because there isn't that much great big stuff left, but they're happening in small things that have characteristics that make them vulnerable. Horseshoe crabs. Horseshoe crabs, all the species of horseshoe crabs that are still alive are in danger. Okay, about 40% of the amphibians, 40% of conifer trees, gymnosperms, pines of various kinds, and so on. 25% of mammals and 14% of birds are in danger. Now, insects are on that list too. They are, do you all remember back when you were kids driving around and having to clean the bug guts off the windshield in the summertime of your car? For those of us who are a little bit up, farther along in years, we probably remember it very clearly. That doesn't happen that much anymore. You don't have to. I can't remember the last time I cleaned bug guts off the windshield of my car. It's because around here in North America, there aren't as many insects. Okay. And this is bad news because insects are involved in pollination. Much of our food supply, the fruits and nuts, and some of the forage crops like alfalfa are insect pollinated, and no insects and no pollinate and none of those plants. Okay, the insects of particular types. And so the lack of pollinators is a big deal. But it could cause crashes in kinds of plants, including some that we like to eat. So there has been a big insect diversity crash due to some of the things that we'll talk about here. But there are still some insects that will come out in large amounts, forming what are called eruptions or big swarms that will cause damage to us. They are also part of the story. Now, one of the reasons why insects have been reduced in number is because many of them are associated with certain plants they pollinate or plants they eat. And the cues for the flowering of the plants are different from the cues for the production of the insects. And if the insects are there, but there aren't any plants to visit, then they die of starvation. Contrary-wise, if the plants are flowering and their pollinators are no way to be seen, they're going to die as well. They're not going to survive. And so mismatching of who eats whom when is an important and significant cause to this. All right, so bees and flowers. In historical times, the bees were around when the flowers bloomed, but if the insects are appearing earlier and the flowers than the flowers are, then you have a much fewer of the flowers that will get pollinated. Right. So in the Northern Hemisphere, spring and summer phenology. Phenology is a science word meaning the timing of life history events. Phenology has been advanced 2.3 to 5.5 days per decade. And so the potential for things happening earlier, because it's getting warmer earlier, because the winters are not as severe, are becoming a problem. Example of this is some study done in the in Central America in the mountains at a particular spot. I'm not sure exactly where it is. On May 27th, 1984, lights were set up to attract insects, and these are the insects that showed up. Lots of bugs. By 2007, they had been reduced significantly. Same arrangement, all done about the same time, within a few days. And then in 2019, there were hardly any left. Okay. But, and again, you can have these mass eruptions of swarms of locusts, for instance. This is in Uganda, just a couple of years ago. Imagine you're a farmer just making do, just feeding your family, and you see this big swarm of very hungry locusts coming your way. That would be that'd be a sinking feeling to be sure. And these men are out there trying to kill them with claws they're hitting them with. It's futile, but you got to feel you got to do something. All right. There are certain kinds of organisms that are going to be more vulnerable, and they are those that depend on interactions with other species, which may or may not be there. Okay. Other traits would be the ability to disperse. As historical habitats become increasingly hostile, some species need to move to new territory, but they're not able to do so because there's something, a body of water perhaps in their way, or they just don't have good enough wings or things like that. The environment changes and they can't change fast enough to stay up with it. And another trait that will make an animal or an organism less likely to survive change would be requirement of a specialized habitat. Amphibians need a special kind of stream or pond to breed in. They specific environmental tolerances. They need calcium out of seawater. So dependence on environmental cues. Some species depend on changes in day length or rainfall to start breeding. Those cues change and they're not able to breed properly. And so in essence, we find ourselves with species that once existed in one location. These are birds that are finding themselves in different locations than they were before. And they are wintering farther north than they have in the past, where they may or may not have sufficient food of the right sort. Because areas of the United States, the Southeast, for instance, are having more, not only a higher average temperature, but the hottest days are lasting longer. They're having more of the hottest days. Now, I think for the interest of time, I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides. Now, one of the things that we see and is included in most every basic ecology class, like the one I teach at Western, is the notion of biomes, which are a kind of ecosystem. They're a large scale community and that are all interacting, including animals and plants and other things. And they're interacting with each other, and they have a particular shape and look to them. And we find any number of those kinds of habitats. The biome, they're called biomes, that is found here is the eastern deciduous forest, or in here it's listed temperate deciduous forest, meaning that they're in an area that has a distinct winter, but a hot summer, and the trees drop their leaves in the fall to avoid the bad times, which are cold, and they grow them again in the spring. That's what deciduous means. And there are deciduous temperate forests in a variety of places. Much of Europe is temperate deciduous forest. Quite a bit of East Asia is as well. I remember visiting a leopard reserve in southeastern Russia near Vladivostok and very near to China that when I was there looked like New England to me. I mean, it's because the climate was the same. And so on. There's other things. There's a taiga forest, which is defined by how much permafrost there is in the soil and so on. Tropical rainforests, which are a shrinking area of the wet tropics and so on. And so these biomes are all defined by what the average air temperature is during the year, whether they're cold, whether they're hot, and how much the average rainfall, other precipitation is. So if you were to name to an average precipitation in centimeters per year in this range, and a average air temperature in this range, and you put them together, you can predict what kind of biome you would have there, and pretty accurately as well. Now, the thing that there are boundary zones, there are transition zones between, for instance, the temperate forest and grasslands. Okay, and as the climate moves toward one, to an area that was temperate grass forest is getting drier out, you're going to have more grassy areas over time, and more of that will become grassland and less of it will be temperate forest. Okay, and that is what is actually happening in as we look at the plant communities we find on mountains that are warming up. Moving up a mountain is the same as moving toward the pole in terms of climate. Okay, and the plants are arranged themselves to live in the areas that they're most comfortable with. And so you can take plant distributions here in the top diagram, and you warm it up for 30 years, and you'll find that the distributions of these plants will shift. Some of them will eventually be forced out because there's not a good place for them anymore. And so you actually have a movement of biomes. The plant communities and the animals will respond to climate change, and you can actually measure the speed of it. And so, and this is some old data, but it would be similar to this. Tropical and subtropical coniferous forests are moving at the speed of 0.08 kilometers per year, and so on. So it's an analogy of motion when what's really changing is climate, which is causing the plant communities and the animal communities to shift because of that. Some of them will go out. And forests will become broken up groups of trees and become krumholtz and become isolated individuals, and then you'll find them being being eliminated, or more likely the other way, where it warms up and the tree line will shift to include areas that were previous permafrosted, and you'll get encroachment and a movement of tree line up the mountains and toward the pole, like this. I went to grad school in Alaska and lived in Fairbanks for 12 years. And if this is not Denali National Park, it's somewhere near it. And you can see the krumholtz. This is an area where you have white, you have black spruce growing in spotty conditions within an area which is discontinuous permafrost, permanently frozen soil. So those areas with that still have permafrost are without significant trees, and the trees they have are pretty skinny. And as the environment warms, the permafrost will be eliminated in some areas and the tree line will shift, and trees will be able to grow where they were not able to grow before. And so Alaska that I knew, which was taiga forest, boreal forest, about 25% of it, the boreal forest is moving north and west. And in the south, it's being replaced by forest, which is more of a temperate rainforest. And the other animals associated with it are either going to have to move along with, or those that are unable to do so are going to be eliminated. And that is part of the story of the sixth extinction. I would be happy to answer questions if I can. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
There were
Well,
a couple of questions here.
I'll read them off to you. It's from Lori. Human impact also includes increasing production sales from one year to the next for companies. They can feel successful in making more money. I feel that's true. It's just, what do you, any comment on that?
Well, I mean, how do you define success, right? We define success as gaining something, gaining prestige or gaining sales figures or sales awards or money in your bank account and things like that. And so that's what we define, or growing wheat for that matter. You know, you're grazing cows and so on. You increase what you're doing in your productivity and you feel better about it. But we also have to balance that with a different reward system that gives us a different kind of satisfaction, a different squirt of dopamine in our brain, which will be the satisfaction of preserving and conserving the world for our grandchildren. Because honestly, and this is my standard tagline, if it's whatever's best for our grandkids is what's best for us.
I agree. Thank you for that question, Lori. If you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I will relay it to Dr. Mitch. That we have one from Bill. This past summer has been a significant decrease in acorn and other nut production. Can you comment on this?
Well, it's not just a matter of climate. Acorns produce huge amounts of oaks produce a huge amount of acorns in certain years and very few in others. And it's called mass cropping. And one of the reasons they do that is so that the animals, squirrels and deer that love eating acorns cannot build a population based entirely on acorns, so that when they do produce a big crop of acorns, not all of them will be eaten. Okay, so it's a way of overloading the environment with their seeds, ensuring that many of them will be able to survive, rather than do a more constant acorn crop, which the squirrels and deer and other animals could adapt to, so that they eat a larger proportion of them every year. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other considerations. Last year was kind of a crazy weather year, and could be there was something stressing the acorns so that they didn't produce the acorn the oak trees, so that they didn't produce the acorn crop that they would have otherwise. There's all these evolutionary wars going on between the eaten and the eaters. Because in most cases, the organisms, the plants that are eaten don't wish to be. And so they will evolve defenses to that. And so there's all this really fascinating stuff that goes on.
Thank you for that question, Bill. Anyone else have any questions for Dr. Mitch regarding his talk? talk on the sixth extinction?
Someone raised a hand. Lori. raised her
Lori, raise the hand.
It's
Are
easier
you-
for me to talk than
Oh, there
quick.
we
I don't write as fast.
Certainly, go ahead.
Both.
I just a comment. I heard before that both the dinosaurs and the birds have the same pelvic and so structure, and so do humans. So I always thought that was interesting how we kind of fit into that.
Well, the birds and the dinosaurs shared anatomical features. My training in biology is more on the insects and invertebrates and ecosystem end. So I'm not sure exactly which characteristics they're using for showing that they are close relatives. There's also sometimes animals will show up with structures that look like another animal, but they're really evolved separately. Like, for instance, all the anteaters in the world, most of them are not close relatives. So you have aardvarks in Africa and giant anteaters in South America and echidnas in Australia and so on. They're really not very closely related, but they've all evolved the same sort of structures because there were ants and termites available as food. So that's the best answer I can give you.
Thank you.
We have another question from Bill. I thought I heard that the Earth was pear-shaped, not exactly round.
Well, it's definitely not round. Exactly. I'm not sure. It would probably require a great deal of extrapolation to visualize the exact shape. But one of the reasons it's not round is because of Theia, that Mars-sized object that slammed into the early Earth and kind of made it lumpy in some fashion. Okay. Now, some of that would round out just because of the gravity of Earth itself over time, but it isn't. It isn't entirely around. Also, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, the circumference of the Earth at the equator is higher than it is at the poles. So, and that may be due to, to spin effects of some sort.
Okay, thank you for that, Bill. Anyone else have any questions for Dr. Mitch before we sign off until not next month, January, correct? I think that's
Yep.
the next time that we have the next installment of Earth in Crisis Series 2. We're going to take a break for the holidays for next month and resume at the end of January. So I guess there's no more questions until then. I wish you a happy and healthy and safe holiday coming up. And if you have any questions regarding the series, feel free to email me or Dr. Mitch, and we'll see you next year in January.
Aurelio has my permission to share my email address from the university, so feel free to do that. If anyone wants it, you can get it from him.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Mitch, as always. We'll see you next time, everyone. Have a well and pleasant evening.